Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting Personal with Parkinson's, our Facebook Live weekly conversation series. I'm Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness for the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. And I'm also the Program Coordinator for the Edmund J. Safra Parkinson's Wellness Program, supported by New York Health's largest healthcare provider, Northwell Health. For over 15 years, the JCC has been hosting programs for individuals living with Parkinson's, and you can find out more about our programs and how to join us on our website at www.mmjccm.org/Parkinson's. You can see the links in our comment section below and just click on them and join us. Again, the intake form is a short form, so please take a moment and fill it out and come join us. This conversation is designed to help put a face to Parkinson's, to introduce you to people living with and thriving with PD, as well as experts who will share research, techniques, and even tips to help those living with PD and their families and caregivers. And now I'm excited to introduce you to our guest, Harry McMurtry. Harry is a native of Canada who had a successful career as a lawyer in Toronto and was tentatively diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's in mid-2004 and was officially diagnosed in 2005. In 2009, he met his wife, Deborah, in Las Vegas, and they had a cross-border relationship for 4 years, which you're going to hear about. You may have heard about Harry because in 2016, he created the 500 Miles for Parkinson's from New York City to Toronto walk to raise funds and awareness about Parkinson's. And they raised over $650,000 New York dollars. Harry and I had a conversation, which was recorded recently, that I want to share with you now. Harry, welcome to the show. It is so nice to meet you.
It's an honor for me to participate in your program.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You have led a really adventurous life. You grew up in Canada, and early in your career, you started a camp for children with disabilities. Is that correct?
Actually, I started the camp when I was 21.
Oh, wow.
Still operating today, almost 40 years later.
That's amazing. And then you eventually got into law and had an active practice in Toronto.
That's correct. I practiced for over 20 years.
Wow. And during that time when you were practicing law, you were diagnosed with Parkinson's, but you said that you were tentatively diagnosed. Can you tell us about that?
I mentioned that because I went through the journey of diagnosis with a dear friend from college days, who eventually became a physician. But while we were attending college, he had a terrible motorcycle accident in which he lost the use of his right arm, from which he lost the use of his right arm. So he dealt with adversity all his adult life, and he was the perfect person to navigate me through the diagnosis process, if I can call it that.
Yeah, I understand that. So you're saying that your friend basically had lost their arm, and I think you mentioned to me when you said you had this Parkinson's diagnosis, they kind of said to you, get over it, it's not that bad. Is that true?
Exactly. He was like, it's no big deal, it's just a bump on the road. You can deal with it. It was pretty overwhelming for me personally, but he made it much easier. He's not a neurologist, he's a physiatrist, but he treats people with Parkinson. But he was really an ideal person at your side in that situation, because it's bewildering and you have no idea. So I did not know that much about Parkinson's, and I'm ashamed to say. Something you want to go through with someone who's dealt with adversity.
Yeah, it's great to, like you said, have a physician and a friend who has dealt with adversity, who can kind of help give us a perspective. And yet at the same time, it is overwhelming. And your experience is not uncommon. Most people don't know a lot about Parkinson's. And when they get diagnosed, they're just rather surprised and overwhelmed. You were rather young when you got the diagnosis. Were you around 40, you said, when that
I
happened?
was 40 when I was symptomatic. I was 42 when I was diagnosed.
Right.
So it was pretty young. So I hadn't encountered any people, friends of my generation who had Parkinson's.
Right. So that makes sense. And you said that, did you have kids at that time?
I had 3 boys.
Wow. How did you tell your friends and family?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, that's an interesting issue because I still don't know the right answer. I didn't tell my children for 2 years, and then only because I had to. I always felt, and I still feel to this day, that's not their problem. But I wanted to shield them from this diagnosis, and some people could disagree with that. But they're very young. And I only told them because I had to tell them because they were going to hear from someone else. But I didn't tell them. I told my close friends. But I did not go public with the disease until after I retired in the end of 2010.
Wow.
Retired from law.
Wow. And you said that you met your wife tell me about that story. Because, you had the diagnosis. She had 3 kids, you had 3 kids, and you said she knew you had Parkinson's, and you guys decided to get married anyway.
Well, I credit her with taking me on. We had a fantastic meeting in Las Vegas. I like to say we met in Paris. We actually met at a blackjack table in the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas. It was a very joyous occasion, and I was feeling pretty good. It was our 20th year reunion from law school and 20th anniversary of graduating from law school. Then we carried on a long distance relationship for 4 years. I had 3 boys who were going through high school. She had 3 kids who were going through and entering high school. And then she decided to get married. We got engaged just before I had deep brain stimulation implantation surgery.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Yes, so that was in 2011. So we got engaged, and then she said, "I'm not going to marry you until you come to New York." So I came to New York, and we got married 2 days later in New York at City Hall in New York City.
Oh, wow. What an inspiring story.
You can find love in all kinds of places.
Yes, you can. Love knows no bounds. And, it's not the first story that I've heard about people falling in love after they've had their diagnosis. So we want to dispel that myth, because sometimes people think, well, what's going to happen? Am I going to be able to find love? And you're proof that you can.
I agree totally.
Yeah. But let's talk about this. Was this a race? I've read that you organized this and raised funds and created 500 miles for Parkinson's. What does that mean? Did you actually walk that, ride your bicycle, drive it? What happened?
I did drive it before I walked it, but it's related to my deep brain stimulation. I had the implantation surgery in 2011. Mm-hmm. And in 2013, while I was still in Canada, Dr. Alfonso Fasano is a leading expert in deep brain stimulation. And he tried a new technique which worked, which helped my walking. So the invention, I realized that I could do a long walk. Walking was my main form of exercise at the time. So I decided to embark on this 500-mile journey, which is a walk from New York City to Toronto. The event took on a life of its own. We did over 45 days. There were originally 3 of us with Parkinson's, plus a crew. And then in New York State, you can only walk with 9 people on a highway without a parade permit. So we stuck to 9 people on our walks in New York State. In Ontario, sometimes we had 100 people walking with us. So so then so that we started organizing that walk in 2014. I walked every day for 18 months.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
And,
That's a long time.
and then, except for a day when I was injured, I completed the 500-mile walk. The other walker, a fellow from Baltimore, walked with us until he got injured. And a woman from Toronto, Sue Thompson, she walked the entire way. I fell one day and had to sit out a day.
Mm-hmm.
But it was quite fun. Well, the most inspiring part of it was not us completing the walk. Sue's very athletic. It wasn't nearly as challenging for her as it was for me. But the inspiring people was meeting people with Parkinson's along the way and talking to them, and they joined us for walks. And that happened throughout our walk. And the difficulty was deciding each day how much time can you spend standing on the side or talking to people, because you have to get so far. so if I were to do it again, which I'm not, I would say try to build in time for stops to meet people and talk about their own journeys.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting. So those of you out there, if you're considering the 500-mile walk, what Harry's advising is, you're going to meet so many wonderful people on the way that you have to schedule in time to talk to them because it's so inspiring. Am I hearing you right, Harry?
Yes, exactly. Well, the thing is, the walking was inviting. Some of the people were running by or cycling by. But we had a deadline and we had to walk 500 miles for 45 days. But you're right, you described the way I would do it. In an ideal world, I'd build in time. The same with public schools. We did visit a couple of schools. But again, if we had more schools, it wouldn't have worked in our schedule. But I think it was very valuable to meet those kids for them to meet us and see what we were doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm inspired just hearing about this walk, and it happened in 2016, of course, before the pandemic. And I wanted to talk about the deep brain stimulation. We're going to have Dr. Ramdani talk eventually, and that's one of his specialties. How was it for you as part of your management strategy for your PD? How did you come to making that decision? Was that something that recommended by your neurologist? And how did it change the quality of your life?
Well, I have to say I've been very lucky with my treatment. I've had world-class treatment in Toronto and in New York. I've been very fortunate. And that's a big problem with Parkinson's, because some people don't have access to great care. I've always had a movement disorder specialist since my diagnosis. And that was Dr. Tony Lang, who's a very famous neurologist. And he was terrific. So I was diagnosed in 2005. I degenerated quite a bit by 2008. And he first suggested it in 2008. And I thought, this guy's crazy. He wants to drill holes in my head. I was still working and I was still playing sports. I said, I don't need this. So on I went. And then a year later, he raised the subject again. And I was degenerated further, or the disease had progressed further. I don't like to say degenerate. It shouldn't use that term. And so I was more receptive to the idea, but I wasn't there yet. Another year passed, and I went to the appointment asking for DBS because my off times had increased and my dyskinesias were getting very bothersome. So it didn't take much to convince him, because he had raised the subject with me. And I had a very positive response to levodopa, which, as you know, is a prerequisite to DBS surgery, or DBS. And so I got in the program, I did all the testing, and I had this surgery in 2011. And I really responded well to it. I know people have different experiences, but my experience has been extremely positive.
That's awesome. And since the walk, what do you do now to stay active and inspired? I mean, that's that's a big undertaking. And I agree with you. Some of those things we do in life that are big like that, you only need to do once, right? I feel that way about jumping out of a plane. I did that once, and I don't need to do it again.
Well, I think it was never intended to be more than a one-off.
Right.
And for lots of reasons, it will remain a one-off. I agree with you, Caroline. For me, I took a big hit physically.
Sure.
I think I had undiagnosed symptoms of dystonia. My dystonia was one of my doctor friend who first diagnosed me. He thought dystonia was my first symptom. I thought it was rigidity, and I'm still not sure he's right because I had both in my right side. But I had bad dystonia in my hip flexor, and I know now that started before the walk, and then it became a debilitating problem after the walk, and it was undiagnosed for about 2 or 3 years. So I suffered through that, and now I'm on the other end, and Botox has been a miracle cure for me. For dystonia.
Wonderful. And for our listeners that might not know what dystonia is, do you want to just tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, dystonia is a major symptom of Parkinson's. It's also a disease in and of itself. Some people only suffer from dystonia, which is dystonic or ill contractions that aren't proper. So I call them uncontrolled contractions or contractions of the muscles, so I can trigger my shoulder, but it goes into it's not a spasm, it's just a stiffness or a contraction. So it's a symptom that has pretty much always been with me. It's reared its head in the last few years, unfortunately.
And you said Botox has been helpful. That's great.
Extremely helpful.
That's awesome.
The only thing that's helped. With respect to dystonia, both levodopa and DBS are very effective in treating it. My dystonia just got to the point where that wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. And so I had pain in my left hip for a few years that only Botox relieved. And so I'm very grateful for that. So I had a battle with my insurance company for over a year, which is another thing. Yeah. I'm having another battle with them now about a new drug, but that's life in the Parkinson's lane.
Let's talk about that a little bit. We haven't really covered that too much on our Getting Personal with Parkinson's. That part of this, the challenge too, is that you are going to be negotiating with insurance companies, right? Regarding your treatments, regarding, well, what about this? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with that?
Well, just speaking from my own experience, my insurance companies have had 2 or 3 different ones over the years, and they've approved my DBS for my the replacement of my neurostimulator. No problems there. But with my medications, they're always reluctant to approve a new medication. So recently, I went on Rydery, which was approved only recently, I think 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Rydery is a different formulation of levodopa and carbidopa. It's more long-acting. Whereas Cinemat or levodopa hits you hard, this hits you more gently, so it flattens out your curve, so to speak. So now they're refusing to cover it. They covered it for a while, now they're refusing to cover it. They refused to do Botox for over a year, and now they're approving it each time.
And just kept at them.
I had a couple of people, both my neurologist and my physiatrist pushed them. But I think perseverance is always a good thing. But sorry.
No. Speaking of perseverance, I was just going to ask you, what has Parkinson's taught you? And it sounds like one of the things is perseverance, right?
Yeah, and you have to be your own advocate. And you have to be your own advocate, not just because no one knows your body like you.
Yeah.
And I said the dystonia in my hip was misdiagnosed. Well, the first doctor is real smart ass. He knew it. He said there's something else wrong with me. And I knew he was wrong, but he wouldn't listen. You know your body, and you have to trust your own instincts. Plus, you have to look after yourself and be your own advocate, because no one else will be. Except my wife is very strong supporter.
Well, you know what? I love what you're saying, and it sounds like for those that are newly diagnosed, that might be something that you might want to say to them as well. And that's always a question we like to ask: is for someone who's newly diagnosed, what advice would you give them?
Well, I thought about this recently. It's tricky because everybody's journey is different. As you well know, Caroline, this disease affects everyone differently. And the general rule is when you're diagnosed young, and I was relatively young, but I know people who've been diagnosed much earlier, like Michael J. Fox, but I was young onset, and the disease generally progresses more slowly. So if it's a young person, I'll tell them, I've had 19 years of this and I'm doing fine, thank you. Not great, but fine. But if it's when you're older and you get diagnosed, the disease tends to get worse. So it's hard for me to tell someone who's 70 and just got diagnosed how to do something that I was 42 when I learned of the diagnosis. So it's hard for me to know what to say in those circumstances. But there's hope. I think there's been some serious setbacks in pharmacological solution. We need to be realistic about this. I've heard people say, don't worry about it, we're fine, it's just a minor course correction. I don't believe that. I think we have to be honest with people and tell them there's not going to be a cure in my lifetime. I'm not being pessimistic, I'm being realistic. I think we have to be honest with people with Parkinson's that we don't have anything right around the corner. And people keep telling me that, and I keep saying, why are you telling me that? Mm-hmm. And I always will have hope. I'm a hopeful person, I'm an optimistic person, but realism is important. And I think it's important for people who have been recently diagnosed. Be realistic, which means it's not a death sentence. There's lots of living to do.
That's beautiful. It's not a death sentence. There's lots of living to do. Well, thank you so much, Harry, for sharing your lunchtime with me and for the inspiration that you shared with us today. We talked about so many things, from deep brain stimulation to your walk to, finding love, to the importance of being realistic with people, that, once there is no cure, and the best that we can do is live well.
Exactly. Well said. Life is full of surprises. Enjoy them. I never thought I'd be living in New York City with a lovely wife and enjoying a great time in my life. I think there's silver linings.
Beautiful. Life is full of surprises and silver linings.
Yes. Thank you so much, Caroline.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What an amazing man. It was just so much fun to spend time with him. And as I listened to that again, I just got re-inspired. If you want to come on to our show and tell us your story, please reach out to us. All you have to do is contact Whitney Chapman. She has been on the show. She is our Yoga for Parkinson's teacher and also a professional stage manager and production person. So she does our behind the scenes work for this show. She writes our scripts and casts the show. And she can be reached at wchapman@mmjccm.org. And then just to let you know, if you want to participate in a class or any of our Parkinson's programs, see the link below and reach out to us. Take the short intake form. It'll only take a minute. And then view our current programs on our website. Next week, I can't wait for you to meet Zarella. Next week, I'll be talking with Zarella, who is another inspiring person living with Parkinson's. By the way, I think anybody living with Parkinson's is inspiring. So please, if you want to join me on the show, I hope you will reach out. She's a chef. She's a restaurateur. She's an author, a podcast host, and a singer, and just so much more. I think Zarella stands for zest, and Zarella Martinez. So I hope you'll join us. And until then, take care and be well, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.